Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick update on the three brand new FE lenses that Sony announced at their press event in New York today, February 3rd, 2016, and they're all part of Sony's new G Master series lenses. So this may be Sony moving away from the Zeiss branding for their top-of-the-line glass. It may not be. I'm not really sure, but either way, this is a step in the right direction for many photographers that often felt Sony was leaving the upper echelon of glass quality out of their lineup. So whether we're talking about resolution or overall performance, that's exactly what the Master line of G glass is all about. It's also very expensive. So a quick run through. I'm not going to go through Sony's marketing here, but the idea is to match finally the performance of glass to the performance of the sensors that Sony's been cranking out, which are, frankly, the best in the business. And that's always been a big criticism of Sony bodies, is that even though they may sport some of the best features and sensors out there, do they have the glass to leverage that quality? And that's exactly what the, again, Master G glass is all about. So stepping away from the name, I'm going to look specifically at the three lenses that they've revamped, really, because that's what I see this as. And you can see them right here. We've got a 24-70, which is substantially larger and heavier than the Zeiss equivalent that existed before, but it's also faster. It's now an f2.8 lens as opposed to an f4 lens. This is something that was rumored for quite a while now. The same applies to the FE 70-200 on the right here. And what's interesting is that even though they aren't physically that much larger than their predecessors, the Zeiss and G equivalent, both of which I own and use regularly, they are substantially heavier, and that's because there's a lot more glass inside both of these lenses in order to facilitate that f2.8 as opposed to f4 rating that the previous gen carried. Also, as I mentioned at the top of this video, this is much more expensive glass than even the Zeiss lens commanded, or of course the first gen G Series 70-200 f4 lens. One of the more interesting lenses, though, is the f1.4 85mm lens, and that's because it isn't gigantic, it isn't incredibly heavy. Well, it is heavy, but when you put it into perspective, this might be one of the more interesting I would say introductions to the FE lineup when it comes to the speed and profile contrast, because the other two lenses, even though they've pretty much stayed the same size, as I mentioned before, they got a lot heavier. So I think this is a lens that's going to satisfy a lot of you out there. All three, I think, are going to be incredibly popular, but you can see this is $1,800 US, so very expensive. This is raising the bar, as Sony has been doing for the last year now, on all of their pricing, maybe 2 years, across the board, for whether we're talking about point and shoot, consumer cameras, or even their now pro-grade lineup with the FE A7R Mark II and A7S Mark II. The 24-70, which again in my mind has to be the replacement to the Zeiss, is $2,200 US. The Zeiss sells now, I think, for a little over $1,000, so that is a very large premium to pay to go from f4 to f2.8, but that's why the G Master series is also promising to render much more resolution from the sensor and really deliver a characteristic that you won't even find with Sony Zeiss glass. So that is what this G Series Master Edition is all about. It's the beginning of Sony really trying to, as they try to get me to do a survey here, rebrand their glass without necessarily having the Zeiss name. At least that's what I see here. I'm hoping it's not the end of their relationship, but it very well may be. And that's because clearly, as you can see here, pricing, not even a price on this lens, by the way, and hold your breath for it, because it may be somewhere around $3,000, a little under $3,000 based on common sense here, in that it was a $1,500 piece of glass when it wasn't the Master G, just the regular G. It's going to command a very high price point. All of them have optical steady shot, and again, a ton of glass is in there, so many more elements in order to achieve that f2.8 rating. So I definitely think we're going to see some very impressive performance out of all three of these lenses. The question is whether or not they're going to be worth it to most of the consumers that have bought into the full frame A7 series, whether we're starting at the beginning, the very first A7, or the A7 II, A7R, A7R Mark II, and so on. And I think it'll be interesting to see how many consumers and professionals are willing to shell out the extra money, because I know so many have complained about not having f2.8 glass like this, but now that they see this price, I'm not so sure that they'll be running to pick it up, as opposed to the f4 options that are already on the market. But definitely a good thing to see more options. Not a great thing, as I keep mentioning, to see the possibility that we are losing the Zeiss brand, which I did think was a partnership that was pretty critical to Sony, but apparently I may have been wrong. Clearly Sony is trying to establish that they can make quality glass for their cameras specifically, which I think is a very good thing. It's something that every manufacturer should do. And if that means they have to cut out the licensing relationship with Zeiss, well, then that shows you it was just more of a licensing relationship than really the pursuit of optimizing performance for their sensors. But there you go, the three new lenses announced in that G Master series. I'm not going to get into what I think of the name of this new lineup of G Glass, but the branding of the logo, the orange, makes sense, Alpha. But that pricing is certainly a tough one to swallow. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.